Welcome to Do Your Dailies, the podcast designed to help you on your journey of addiction recovery. We're going to go through the big book of AA and use our collective experience, strength, and hope to help you understand what addiction recovery really looks like. So grab some snacks, sit back, press play, and dig deep. Thanks for being here. Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of the Do Your Dailies podcast. My name is Chris Wilkins and I'm your host. I'm here with my friends Joe and Dave, and we are a collective group of individuals just wanting to get real, wanting to carry the message of recovery and make some connections. So we're glad you're here. We're glad you're joining us. And guys, how we doing today?
Well, I've been looking forward to today. I've had an opportunity to talk to a few fellows that were kind of apprised of what's going on today, and I'm looking forward to kind of jumping into where we left off last week and taking an opportunity to really do a deep dive into more of like what makes this program great and work to be the most effective way of addressing addiction that we know of.
Well, my name's Dave, and be straight up right into the camera. I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I'm grateful to be so. And today, I went to the gym and worked out really hard. I'm 67, so what does that mean? That means, everybody left the gym. I was working out too hard. That's a lie. But what's important about today thus far is I do another activity where I'm outdoors, and I was gone for a while, and I was sitting in my vehicle, and my wife had made me a lunch. And I was looking over a lake, and I was alone, and I was eating the lunch that her hands prepared for me this morning. There was a little note in there, and that's what recovery is to me. That I have a relationship, and she was thinking about me and put together some food, and it was her hands that made that sandwich. And so that sandwich meant a lot, and I savored every bite. And as I finished that, I sent her a text, and I said, had a great workout. I'm out here by the lake, and I'm hungry, or I was hungry, and now I've eaten your lunch, and you've given me sustenance. And I said, I love you. That all is a learned skill for me personally. I did not know how to do that as a young man when I was in the height of whatever I was doing. But I know how to do that today because of other people that went before me, that put their hand out, that never took their hand away. They helped me in spite of who I was at the time, my attitude, my vulgarity, all of that I was doing. They never took their hand away. So we're extending a hand, and I'm so grateful for these two gentlemen that offer this. And we're extending a hand of fellowship, of understanding. And so I believe today is one of the deepest messages that we're going to dive into. What we're going to dive into today is what I take the guys that I work with through first, because it's so critical and vital. So it is a privilege. It's an honor to be here today, and we'll rock and roll, eh?
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I love it. I'm going to acknowledge a couple of things. I've had an emotional day already today. I anticipate, not that I want this particularly. I'm not necessarily inviting this, because it still makes me uncomfortable when I get emotional. I encourage everybody else to feel it, but I want to be the exception. I want to be the one that's the stoic, and it's just not congruent with who I am. But had some really powerful, very powerful emotional things today. I was lucky to have recorded another podcast. We have another kind of a sister podcast. And I recorded with an old friend today. And so I'm going to commit to you guys and to you viewers and listeners. Sometimes we're going to tell silly jokes that don't make sense. Sometimes we're going to say things that don't resonate with you. But I want to invite you, particularly as we get into this topic today, this spirituality component, that you let go of the distractions in your world right now, if you can, as much as you can. Get to a quiet place if you're able to. Try to tune in. We talk about the three questions that we might ask a higher power. Do you know who I am? Do you know where I am? And do I really matter to you? And I hope you've done this. If not, press pause and do it now. Again, do you know who I am? Do you know where I am? And do I really matter to you? Spend some time in that quiet if you haven't already. And then when you press play again, we want you to turn to page 25 in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's where we're going to begin. That's where we left off last time. And so right smack in the middle of the page, it says this: the great fact is just this and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences. And right after that, like we talked about last episode, there's an asterisk in the book. And you look down at the bottom of that page, and it's going to invite you to turn to the appendix. And we're going to jump over to that right now. And if you guys are okay with that, I'll start reading there. Appendix II, the spiritual experience.
So just one thought. This appendix, he's right, there's an asterisk there. It says fully explained. If you go over to page 27, there's another asterisk. And down at the bottom it says for amplification, see Appendix 2. So 2 pages later. And it all has to do with the spiritual experience. And then if you go over to page 47, it's talking about an effective spiritual structure can be built. About 2/3 of the way down. There's another asterisk there. And then down at the bottom it says, please be sure to read Appendix 2 on the spiritual experience. So 3 times in a matter of short number of pages, and at the last one, please be sure to read the spiritual experience. They are begging you. Now, keep in mind, that's the spiritual experience is clear back in 528, something like that. But they wrote that early on as they were talking about this spiritual experience. What that message back there in that spiritual experience is so critical that they reminded us 3 times to do it. So to Chris's point, I think it makes a lot of sense to go back and see what they had to say.
So it's found on page 567.
567, you're right.
Yeah. I'd like to just comment too that this isn't something that again in this particular podcast we're not looking at the Big Book as like something that you just read once. Okay, we've emphasized and encouraged people to understand to use this as a textbook. It's not that you just read it once and you've got the material. It's like you're going to need to read it again and again and again and again, and it shouldn't really be a study and stop kind of situation. It should be an ongoing process because there's depths to this message that even I'm still learning as a man in recovery that still surprises me, still stands out to me. And I've read this book quite extensively, at least 7, 8 separate times, and then on top of that, just going through it with hundreds of my own personal clients over the years. So from my personal standpoint, this isn't something that you just go over and just flash through and just to check it off. This is the roadmap with the directions for what you need to do to be successful, to reclaim your life as a man or a woman who is struggling with any type of substance abuse problem. And I might also just extend that beyond that. I think the principles in this book can go far beyond just chemical addiction. I think that these principles can be utilized for anybody that's having any difficulty with anything in their life. That's been my personal experience. So we're
condition.
yeah, the human condition.
Yeah.
Yep. I don't take this book to just pass it off as if it doesn't have any merit or meaning. This book has meaning that will change and alter somebody's life if you read it and apply it and continue to study it, because a once read through is not enough to understand, and that's what we're really striving to accentuate here, is to assist newcomers and also those who have actually been in the program for some time to take a good hard look at looking at this in a different, deeper meaning, instead of just glancing through it and just getting the surface stuff. We're really trying to get to the meat of what we have found in the experience of our personal journey into recovery.
If I could, I'd like to offer something that was really hard for me, and this is again on page 47, and it says, do not let any prejudice. What is prejudice? Old thoughts, untested thought process, or that you may have against spiritual terms, to deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. What they're asking us to do is, oftentimes we get spirituality and religion, we use those in a synonymous fashion, and they're not. We're talking about spirituality. Now, we're going to define that a little bit later, but what he's asking us to do is, do not let old thoughts, old mindsets deter me from asking myself, what do these spiritual terms really mean to me? And in my case, I couldn't even define them. I didn't know what they meant. I just had this armor up against everything. And that is precisely where we're going to go. So I just ask you, as Chris mentioned earlier, just open up and think here. This is a process, and I'll just accentuate what Joe said. Study this like a spy. And maybe I've said that. I don't know. But we need to study this very, very differently. So off to the spiritual experience we go.
Here we go. So again, page 567, the spiritual experience. It says this: the terms spiritual experience and spiritual awakening are used many times in this book, which, upon careful reading, shows that the personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism, and I'm going to just add in any addiction, has manifested itself among us in many different forms. Yet it is true that our first printing gave many readers the impression that these personality changes, or religious experiences, must be in the nature of sudden and spectacular upheavals. Happily for everyone, this conclusion is erroneous. In the first few chapters, a number of sudden revolutionary changes are described, though it was not our intention to create such an impression. Many alcoholics have nevertheless concluded that in order to recover, they must acquire an immediate and overwhelming God consciousness, followed at once by a vast change in feeling and outlook. Man, that just kind of describes that immediate and overwhelming. I want it now. I want it immediate. I want it right away. I want it yesterday, as we've joked sometimes in the past.
So why did they put that in there? There are a couple of points that I'd like to make, but in general, why did they open up with those two paragraphs saying what they did?
Well, my understanding is because if we go back into chapter 1, Bill's story, Bill had an overwhelming spiritual experience that changed his outlook and perception instantaneously about his relationship to alcohol, his relationship to the divine, and his journey moving forward. That is what I believe they're referring to, is that experience to a lot of the newcomers, for those that were reading the big book for the first time, got an idea in their own experience that they needed that same experience that Bill had, that changed his outlook and perception of kind of his relationship to alcohol. And I believe that what they're inviting us to do is take a different look at it, instead of like just reading it and saying, okay, I've got to have what he's got. They're inviting us to say, okay, we had this particular experience when they had the first edition come out, and they've subsequently like corrected it to help us understand that that nature of sudden and spectacular upheavals happily for everyone. This conclusion was erroneous. In other words, it's inviting us to understand there's an error in your thinking if you're expecting like a specific shift that is so profound that you'll never look at it again and never like struggle with it, because that's not the case. Because even in Bill's story, it says that the first year and a half in his recovery, he was not so well. So even Bill's experience did not extinguish his experience from still having the obsession of the mind. He still had that. And I think what we're experiencing here is an invitation to say, slow down, take a look at this in the context of what we're being exposed to, but also understand we're not trying to set you up for failure. We're trying to set you up to understand what you need to understand moving forward. That's how I take that. Any thoughts on that, Chris?
No, as you were saying that, I was thinking about just kind of that quick fix desire. That maybe it's only me, that I want the results. This is what you're gonna get. Okay, sign me up, but I want it now. And sometimes we struggle with that persistence and that continuity. But yeah, I was thinking about too when Ebby shows up, and he sees that drastic change, and it maybe feeds that instant gratification appetite that people have. Well, this guy did it. Why can't I? Why can't I get that same kind of a thing? And we've talked in the past about individuals that we might know that are sober and have sobriety for years, a decade, couple of decades, but maybe perhaps a change hasn't, outward appearance doesn't suggest happiness in that individual. And, far be it from me to question somebody's recovery or who they are and how they are and all those kinds of things. But when someone doesn't appear to be happy, why do I want to be part of that? What do they have that I don't that looks appealing? When somebody looks happy, when somebody looks genuinely excited to live, I'm like, yeah, what's their secret? What do they got going on? Let me get some of that magic. And we know it's not magic. We know what it looks like. So anyway, what's ticking there, Dave?
I just pulled the pin on 2 grenades. So a couple things. And I get why they said that. Yeah, Bill had that experience. But in my book, I've got these things circled: spiritual experience, an awakening, a personality change, upheaval, sudden revolutionary changes, overwhelming God consciousness, vast change, transformations. We'll read more of those, but I've got all those circled. And so for me, I look and say, we're talking about some change here. Frankly, I'm not going to apologize. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm just going to talk about me. What I was doing was so far off in left field and so counterintuitive and so destructive that there's a process here, and I've got to do things to have then this change. So in my book, I also wrote down why slowly, slow action, half measures. Why didn't I do that? In other words, I'm looking and saying, I don't have what he does, so what's on? Does this not work, or did I not work it? Did I not do it? Is there still resistance? And we're going to talk about in a big way here shortly, but what we're really discussing here, folks, is a complete internal shift. When we talk about spirituality, in my mind, it's a completely internally different way of looking at life and so forth. And quite frankly, I'll say this, for me, it was, how do I look differently at God? And I couldn't explain my spirituality. I had no words to explain it. I didn't know how to. I had no explanation of God or what it was or who I thought I was or who he was or why I thought about a God of fear, hellfire and brimstone, all that sort of thing. So I was so far off. And so my point is, I was so scared, and I'd like to point this out for me. The reason it was slow is because I was fearful, and I didn't think I was worthy. I didn't think I knew how. I didn't think anybody was listening, and so that I just, armored up. So a couple points that are really important here. We're about to talk and discuss some significant changes, a 180-degree shift in the way we see life and do life. And I had one fellow teach me this. He said, Dave, what you think right now and what you feel is not as important as what you do. If you start behaving differently, if you start doing differently, and we'll get into the details of what that really means a little bit later, but then you will think different and you will feel different. And he was absolutely right. There is no question. And so the context of the book is what took us through. It's working the steps, and it's starting off with this spiritual experience. So let's keep going. I think that's important.
All right. Among our rapidly growing membership of thousands of alcoholics, such transformations, though frequent, are by no means the rule. Most of our experiences are what the psychologist William James calls the educational variety, because they develop slowly over a period of time. Quite often, friends of the newcomer are aware of the difference long before he is himself. He finally realizes that he has undergone a profound alteration in his reaction to life, that such a change could hardly have been brought about by himself alone. What often takes place in a few months could seldom have been accomplished by years of self-discipline. With few exceptions, our members find that they have tapped an unsuspected inner resource which they presently identify with their own conception of a power greater than themselves.
So the question I have still stands. Developed slowly over a period of time. Is that due to my resistance, my lack of understanding, I'm new at this, all the above. But what's really cool about this is other people see it in us.
More often than not before we see it in ourselves.
And those words that, with few exceptions, our members say they have tapped in. Well, how do you tap into something? That's a physical process. That doesn't just happen osmotically. You have to do action is involved. Tap into an unsuspected inner resource which they presently identify. So there's this powerful, I think there's this process, there's something in it, that this imperative that says we want to grow, we want to do better, we want to live at a higher vibration. And alcohol and drugs just suppress that. And so once we put that on hold and we start talking to people and we see it in their eyes, I'm tapping into, and a fellow told me once, Dave, just start with no harm. Let's just be mindful of your language, how you speak. And in my case, it was a lot of profanity all the time. He said, you use that because you don't know what else to say.
Right.
And he said, so I'm going to ask you to watch how you articulate yourself. Think before, don't just, lob an F-bomb, but think about what you want to say. And if you have a question, say the question, Well, to me, that was a complete shift in just my mindset. Just that alone was powerful.
This occurred to me. Somebody said to me a long time ago, a wise man, shared a quote with me. He said, the key to happiness is aligning your actions with your values. And as we're reading to this point, that just keeps hitting me. Sometimes we want that change, but we aren't in alignment with whatever that is. Or spiritually, we might think, I've got to align with somebody else's values. A neighbor, a parent, a coworker, whatever it is, a friend. We think, well, I don't know what my values are. Well, what are their values? I've got to comply to be included or to be a good boy or something like that, as opposed to really digging and going, well, what do I believe? What's my connection? What's my spirituality? And I think, in my opinion, in my experience, both as a human being and as a counselor and therapist, is at a young age when somebody feels like they're supposed to be, quote unquote, following somebody else's value system and they don't know what their own is, there's almost an abandonment or a surrender of their own spirituality for that compliance, to be told you did a good job, to be told you're doing right, you're following the ... religious faith preference or spiritual principles. And so we get to a point where, as humans, we go, I don't even know what I believe in. There's more of a disconnect there. And so one of my hopes is that this is an invitation to all of us to take that step back. What do I believe? What speaks to me? Where do I feel connected spiritually? Where does that resonate in my bones, in my veins? That part of me that says, I'm not alone. I'm not doing this alone. Because I think the opposite of spirituality in some regards has been that aloneness, that exclusion. Like I'm not connected anywhere I don't belong.
You know, I heard this a long time ago, and I've spoken to many friends about this, but, you know, that idea of seeking something out that will ground us, you know, on some level, alcoholism turned out to be that for me, or very early into my addiction. You know, it without really going into great detail, it replaced a lot of the spirituality that I had come to understand and know, because it just did something, you know, to my awareness that nothing else did. And it was consistent. It was powerful. It was unbelievably powerful. And that, what's really meaningful to me is like how this first paragraph basically touches on it. It says, upon careful reading shows that the personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. In other words, that many different forms is saying there is not one expected like journey that you're going to have where it'll be like just batten down the hatches, this is what it is. It's like we read here down further upon reading that people will see this that are part of our inner circle long before we do. That's what they're basically inviting us to understand, is that personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism. It will not necessarily just dawn on us that we've got this. It will be a slow exposure over time to applying these principles to where we get this, that there has been something within us that has significantly shifted and changed. And again, it's not that we're not aware of it. It's just that it's so subtle that when it does hit us, others who have seen it maybe might not have commented initially, but they might say something along the lines of, whatever you're doing, just keep doing it. You know?
What a cool validation. What a cool, just kind of gentle pat on the back.
Yeah.
You know, you're doing something right.
I have to go in here. Presently identify with their own conception of a power greater than themselves. So what we're saying there is take some time, sit down with pen and paper, and this is what I was taught a long time ago. Explain your conception of your higher power, Dave, in words that a 5-year-old can understand. Albert Einstein said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And so what is my own conception of a power? And to Joe's point, that's a very broad thing, many ways, but I need it to be specific to me. And maybe I come to, I don't know yet, or I need to fill in a blank, but I don't want to just avoid it. So all of these changes come about is because we're thinking in a different way. We're pushing.
Yeah.
Alcohol for me was the crack in my armor that let God in. I didn't know what the context of God meant and how, so I had to sit down and today, you know, I have a relationship and it's very different than the one 5 years ago, 10 years. I'm asking different questions to my higher power than I did, you know, when I was in my 30s. And before that, didn't even know one existed. So what I want to emphasize here is that we need to sit down And maybe you're alone, maybe, and write it down, and then see if you can explain it. See if it's clear enough in your own mind what your conception of a higher power is. So the first concept on page 567 is all about these changes. We're going to read one more paragraph, and then we're going to shift into a very critical concept that we really need to spend some time on so that the first concept can take place. Because if we don't do the second one, the first one won't happen. And,
right.
And there's a reason I know about that, because I didn't. So we'll keep going.
Most emphatically, we wish to say, well,
most of us think.
We're there. Most of us think this awareness of a power greater than ourselves is the essence of spiritual experience. Our more religious members call it God consciousness. Most emphatically, we wish to say that any alcoholic capable of honestly facing his problems in the light of our experience can recover, provided he does not close his mind to all spiritual concepts. He can only be defeated by an attitude of intolerance or belligerent denial.
Okay, I'm gonna jump into this because this particular statement that we just read has so much significance about how do we move into this thing called recovery. And I think that we need to do it justice by really underlining that concept of he does not have a closed mind to all spiritual concepts. If you have a closed mind, you are not going to be tolerant, okay? And you will be in denial because you will be thinking that the way that you perceive it, the way that you do it is the correct way. I can tell you right now that I still work on holding on to that aspect of like being tolerant and working on getting rid of my belligerent denial, because I still have that sharp ego in me that says, no, you're right. And when that comes up, I am telling you right now, that is the time I have to do my work to make sure that my mind is not closed to opportunities that can present themselves that will literally transform my life, because my thinking changes, and if my thinking changes, everything else changes. And I sat too long in that mindset of my way is right, and I learned through sad, personal, painful experience that I don't want to be right any longer. You know, I want to have an open mind that allows me to distinguish myself to seeing the things that I could not see before, if that makes any sense.
You're making me think of just this thought process of sometimes we have to know, we have this need to understand things, to be able to like put our finger on it, to maybe explain it to someone else. And I've really practiced being able to say, I'm not sure, I don't know, I'm not certain. But here's what I have gathered. Here's what I do understand. And I'm okay letting go, at least for a time, that need to understand everything, the ins and outs of all things, you know. So for my spirituality, that's been a component there. There's a lot of stuff I don't understand. There's a lot of stuff I have questions about. I'm just continually seeking. You said something a moment ago too, Joe, doing my work. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not that I did my work. I'm doing my work. I'm doing currently, still. And my hope is that we're all doing that. Dave, you've said something a couple of times as we've visited, even as we were formulating plans for this particular podcast, and you'd made comments about learning things new from the big book about yourself. And it sparked in me that, again, just kind of permission to be open-minded. There's no ego in this that I've got to know everything. I've got to understand all things. It's at this point in time, this is my understanding. This is how this applies to me. I'm still seeking. I'm still pursuing. I'm still investigating, you know, and that understanding grows. It expands, and it's a beautiful thing.
I just like to point out, so I'm going to repeat myself. The first page was all about change, about ramping up, about doing it different, slowly, fast, however, but a significant change. And then there's this tremendous warning. And that's what I have in my book, the last 3 paragraphs, a tremendous warning. And you read most emphatically. Mm-hmm. Now, this is a perfect example of the way Bill writes. Most emphatically, he can't put more juice in than he's putting in there right now. We wish to say that any, not a few, not a percentage, any alcoholic capable of honestly facing his problems can experience all these changes, and then, as Bill does, provided. And then he says it 3 different ways. He does not close his mind. He can only be defeated by an attitude of intolerance and belligerent denial. So he repeats himself 3 times, emphatically saying you can change, but beware of this, the closed mind, intolerance, belligerent. And so this big change, this colossal life change that we're seeing what we want and all that, yes, anybody can do it, but if you have this, you can't. I mean, he's very blunt there. If he can only be defeated. And what's really interesting to me is the next paragraph. He repeats himself. He gives the vital essentials of recovery, but he repeats himself. So let's read that one. Then I want to come back to it.
We find that no one need have difficulty with the spirituality of the program. And now in italics, willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness are the essentials of recovery, but these are indispensable.
So the question that I have is, why does he say we find that no one need have difficulty with the spirituality of the program? Well, what is the spirituality of the program? What is it? You don't have to have a problem with it, but what is it?
We can't do this alone. We can't do this by ourselves.
We need a power greater than ourselves to come into our lives in a sufficient way that will create the transformation.
Exactly. And I look at it, I looked at this and studied it, and finally it just hit me. And I don't know that I've shared this before, but if I were to answer the question, what is the spirituality of this program? In my opinion, he gives the answer in the very next sentence. Those 3 attributes, willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness, because if I have those, then I can create my own conception of a power greater than myself. Right. I can take input from you and others, and I can ask the questions, and I can write it down, and I can create my own God consciousness. I can create my attitude of prayer and how Dave Beck will pray. Because if I have a closed mind, I can't do this. And notice, to your point, he italicized it, and then he does it again. He says, the essentials of recovery. Well, what is essential? What is an essential item? It's critical, and he can't help himself. But these are indispensable. So
they're warnings again.
Yeah, I mean, these are indispensable essentials of recovery. That's repetitive, it's redundant. But why is he doing that?
Because I think he's trying to emphasize the critical nature of... Now, I call these characteristics. They have to be involved in our personalities to shift ourselves from the state that we used to be in into the state that we need to be in order to receive the information that will transform us from the old way of thinking, behaving, and acting into the new way of thinking, behaving, and acting.
Exactly. So how are we defeated? Intolerance and belligerent denial. So he hits it straight on. The spirituality of this program is willingness, honesty. If you're willing to show up, walk in, be present. If you're willing to tell your truth, what is the truth about you, Dave? And then you're open-minded to suggestions of others in the book and wherever it may come from, then it all works. We create this, but these are indispensable. He can't help himself. He has to repeat it and say, and why? And why is it all italicized? Because they experienced it. He experienced it. He saw in others when they didn't do this.
Yeah.
And so that's why this is so critical. So this monumental change, this cataclysmic change that we're looking to experience, the very foundation is these willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness to defeat this attitude of intolerance, get rid of it so that I can absorb. So I lay down my shield, I lay down my sword, and I say, okay, what do you think about spirituality? And what do you think? And what do I think? And I better write this down. And I still have questions, so what do you think again? It's this ongoing pursuit of my own conception of a power greater than myself. And there lies the powerful internal shift.
As you were saying that, it occurred to me how often in my life I have done or observed what you just said. What is your understanding? And when we hear that, there's that predetermined refusal or rebuttal or no, you're wrong and here's why, as opposed to interesting. Okay, that's how you see it. That's how you experience it. Who am I to tell someone else that they're wrong when it comes to these spiritual principles? My spirituality is my spirituality. And we go to this willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness. So if I say to somebody, what's your spirituality? And they barely open their mouth and they start telling me, and I'm already saying, nope, you're wrong. I've struggled. I failed in that, in me being open-minded in that regard. It doesn't mean because somebody shares with me what their perspective is that I have to adopt that now they're right and I'm wrong. But we can sit and share those experiences. And you said this a moment ago too, characteristics. Mm-hmm. What are the characteristics of my concept of spirituality? The character traits of my higher power? Fascinating. Yeah. When we write those things down, we might call those our values even.
Right.
What are my values? And does that align with my higher power? It's interesting.
What if I look at you and I say, what do you think? What's your experience? And then you talk, and I think about it, and what if there's this synergistic effect that 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2? It creates this third possibility that I'm going to tweak mine a little bit because you had this experience and all of it. And here's what's fascinating about it, because you just kind of led into this, Chris. You said someone starts to speak and I've already discounted it before he spoke. So what does Bill do? He puts in the last paragraph in the spiritual experience. And this is a quote from, our friend Herbert Spencer. Go ahead and read.
There is a principle which is a bar against all information, which is proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation.
I've asked many, many people what those last 4 words mean. Oftentimes I don't get the right answer. So we need to talk. What does contempt prior to investigation even mean?
I'll define it for you from my perspective, Dave. I'm right. Seriously.
And there's a wall and everything.
Right. There's no penetration of that wall. Once I go right, oh my gosh, there is no open-mindedness whatsoever, and that is my contempt prior to investigation, because when I say I'm right, or if I even believe I'm right, there is nothing that's coming in that's going to deviate me from my line of thinking that could transform my life.
And you stay small.
Yep.
What?
I was going to say, as you said that I'm right, there's a secondary, whether we say it out loud, there's a secondary message to that. And sometimes that's the primary message. I'm right and you're wrong.
Yeah.
You're wrong. Anyone who doesn't believe the same as me is wrong.
Yeah.
Because I know all. And all the narcissistic and arrogant and ego-driven beliefs that we say. Mm-hmm. And I have a separate concept, maybe for a different day or another conversation or whatever. But I think when we have that strong showing of ego, that level of confidence that I think is arrogance, not I know who I am, but arrogance, it's actually an indication of I don't know what I'm talking about. I have no idea. And there's shame in that. There's embarrassment in that and a few other things. But I've got to say powerfully to kind of put people off the trail, off the hunt, off the scent, that I don't know what I'm talking about. I've got to say it real loudly. But again, I'm right as well as you're wrong.
Yeah.
And it's such a deal breaker right away.
Well, that is the defeated state of somebody that won't ever get the message. You know what's interesting is as we were reading this today, I was reminded of, you know, the three other characteristics that we went over last time when we actually read There Is a Solution. Okay, so it says there is a solution. Almost none of us like the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, and the confessions of shortcomings. You tie those three into willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness, you have got a powerful recipe to break through that rightness that can really transformatively get you into a state of consciousness that will be sufficient to allow you to get that spiritual relationship in your life that is sufficiently needed to overcome the addiction and the aspects of the obsession of the mind, the malady of the body, or the malady of the spirit, and the obsession with the allergy. It's all typically addressed within those 2 pages, those characteristics, in my opinion. So this is, in my opinion, probably one of the greatest, most instructive invitations to the men and women in early recovery, saying, do not do this. You do this at your own peril, and you will still have to suffer. That's the way I take this.
I'd like to add one more element. If you were to ask me, what did I see in over 2 decades of working with individuals, it's the notion I'm not enough. So the question that begs asking is, why would I have contempt prior to investigation? Why would I not even be curious? And I'll just speak candidly in my own experience, because maybe I don't, because of what I've done, maybe because of my past, I don't feel worthy. Maybe I'm not enough. Maybe you represent something that I don't know how to be a part of. I don't even understand. I can't even talk about it. I don't even understand how to talk about spirituality. So why do I have contempt? Is because I don't want to be discovered. I don't want to be exposed. I'm scared to death. And not only am I maybe thinking I'm not enough, and the disease of alcoholism and addiction is a disease of shame, and we're acutely aware, and we are our own voice. We are far more destructive towards ourselves than anyone else. And so why do I have this contempt? Because I don't want to expose anymore. And the other part that I would say is, if I don't have any experience with this sustaining itself, meaning I don't know how, I can see what you have, but I don't even know how to get there, and will it stay? Because I've tried to quit, and it didn't, and the demons came and all this stuff. But is it sustainable? Is this good for today? Is it good for next week and next month? I don't have a mechanism. I don't have a strategy. Therefore, I don't have any hope. Hope is only as good as the strategy that I employ to take me to another level. So that's why I believe that he's so strong with this, to recognize, okay, yes, this is a disease of guilt and shame, and hold your head high. There is hope. Why? Because of the strategy. Yep. But you've got to be open enough to hear it. And if you will open up even just a little bit and put down some of that obstinance and start in with even defining what your own spiritual would, write a few words down. It is my experience, and the experience of many others that I've worked with, that starts to, start to build a foundation, and it starts to build on itself. There's nothing that builds success like one little tiny piece of success. And so I would ask you to consider this. Consider very heavily the words that you use to describe yourself. When I talk about do no harm to self. And one of the questions I've asked over the years many, many times is, if I talk to you like you talk to you, would we still be friends? And rarely have I had a person say yes, because we use our own words. So this whole thing about this spiritual experience starts with how we think and discuss with ourselves. And so we're not damaged goods. We've done some things, okay? We have. So be it. But we're not bad people trying to become good people. We're sick people trying to become well. There is a big, big difference there. And it all starts right here.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, we're human. We mess up, we blow it. And I think it's not that we excuse those things, but we acknowledge I'm learning. And I just had an opportunity to learn again. Here's what I'm going to do about it. You know, we're in the proving grounds. And I'll echo something you said a while ago too, Joe, when you said, I'm doing my work. Guys, we're doing our work. We're doing our work. It's not just us. We want you doing your work too. And we thank you for being along for the ride, or inviting us along for the ride. Before we conclude today, guys, any other things to add in?
You know, I appreciate that concept, Dave, that you shared, because I still am working with clients that are dealing with that concept of I'm not worthy, or more specifically, I'm not enough. You know, if we could impart the concept that you are sick and you're in the transition of getting well, that changes a lot of the psychology that creates roadblocks and, you know, stumbling blocks to like allowing yourself to go on that journey of the exploration that things are going to be different and that they can be overcome because you're on a journey of healing, instead of like, this is who I've always been, this is who I'm always going to be, and I'm going to the grave like that. It's like, that's the stuff that will stop anybody.
Well, I would ask you this. If you don't think you're enough, what evidence do you have? How would you know? Mm-hmm. Well, because you drank. Okay, yeah, under the influence of alcohol, yeah, I'm small. I don't do much, but I don't do that anymore. So I get to be different. So do you. It's powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. It's worth it. This juice is so much worth the squeeze. It just really is. And tonight I'm going to go home and give my wife a big hug. And I talked to my grandson last night, and he hit 2 homers in his big tournament. And you know, he had a diving, stabbing catch at short, and got a double play out of it. And boy, do I love that. That's what grandpas are built to do. And you know, I'm grateful to still be here. Good heavens. I might be stiff and sore. These guys are making fun of me, by the way, about how I'm walking stiff and like an old man. That's all right.
You know, if I can be blessed to live as long as you have to this point, Dave, and be as active as you are, I'm going to count myself really lucky. And both of you men have been great mentors in my life. We met in the rooms of a treatment center, and I've looked at you both for many years, about a decade now, over a decade now, as heroes and as people I trust. And so I thank you so much for sharing this time and for sharing the message with our viewers, our listeners. And I've shared with you in the past this. I'm approaching this from the perspective of, I'm not delivering a message to anyone else. I'm trying to soak up your guys' knowledge, your experience, and learn a little more about myself along the way. And it's been a really cool experience. We're a dozen episodes in, and we're still on page 25.
I'm going to have to be 150 before we get to the end of the book, huh?
Progress, not perfection. Isn't that the statement?
And it's teaching us patience too. It's teaching us patience, and to go with those things that might come into our hearts, rather than let's just cruise through it. You know, shout out to our producer Motley Sounds for being patient and navigating all these different episodes with a bunch of guys just talking. But that's one of the things I love. A group of guys getting together and talking, just feeling and experiencing. So, thanks for tuning in. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And we're going to see you next time.
Thank you.
Have courage. Ciao.
Take care. Thanks for checking out this clip from the Do Your Dailies Big Book podcast. If you like what you hear and you want more, please like and subscribe and share this show with your friends, with your clients, with your sponsees. That's the best way to support us bringing you more recovery content. You can follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and X at Do Your Dailies. This podcast is sponsored by Hobble Creek Health and is edited and produced by Nielsen Digital.